I'm very glad to be here, and I think it's very appropriate that we're in the tool department because we all definitely are going to be tools in solving these issues related to childhood health and childhood obesity. And I never did wear a vegetable costume, but I once was asked to put on bunny ears and be the Energizer Bunny. So I think, in doing those things that we try to do to lift the spirit of the campaign, I've done my stint. I'm going to talk today, and I was surprised and a little disappointed to find out I was the only real school person here in the room, and I haven't been teaching in schools for a long time, but I do make it a point and have made it a point throughout my career to spend a lot of time in schools and with young people because my passion has been the physical activity part of this health equation for my whole career, and I very much want to foster that with kids. Who watches this? These are my 6 grandchildren, 3 of whom live here in Maine. And so when I told them what I was doing here and why I was in Maine right now and so on, and why I wasn't going to be at their house and so forth and so on, I told them, and I was pleased and happy to hear that they knew all about 5210. And they knew what those messages were, and they have obviously been told about that perhaps at school. And they are all very active, and 3 of the 6 are pretty healthy eaters. And the other 3, we're working on. But they got the messages, so I'm hoping that's going to help them, begin to branch out and eat a little greater variety. Not that they don't eat reasonably healthy things, but they don't eat very many different things yet. And so we're trying to introduce them to new things. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about why the connections between health and school are so important and what some of them are and so on. And most of those things, people generally know, I think. And then the opportunities that schools provide and the challenges they face in dealing with anything that people put on their plate, which is lots of things. And that there are many, optimistically, there are many new initiatives and programs and things. 5210 is an example of that, but that are available to help schools and people who work with schools to bring these messages, reinforce these messages, and initiate programs and so forth. And then finally, strategies for us as people who work with young people and schools to make that go, hopefully, a little more successfully sometimes. Schools are a special bureaucracy that you need to kind of go with the flow to work with them sometimes. Why are schools a good place, and why should they be worried about health? Well, all kids go to school. That's the good news and the bad news. Over 55 million kids now are in school, public or private, in the United States. Only about 35% of those are getting, and I'm going to use mostly physical activity references, but the nutrition issues go hand in hand. Only about 35% of those kids are meeting the national guidelines for physical activity. So there's a lot of work to be done. Schools have historically assumed some interest and role in health because immunizations, the requiring of immunizations and the providing of immunizations through school settings and so on has been historically prevalent, as well as health screenings. And also curricular issues have included health information in health education and physical education to whatever varying extent it occurs in schools. Those are important. We need to strengthen them, keep them going, and so forth. But there's many other things that could be done. The school's mission, and this is what the counter-argument is sometimes from the overburdened school leaders, is we are about learning, academic learning, literacy. And so all this is great, but we can't, we just can't do everything. But really, health literacy is certainly central to students' future, and so we need to connect to their central mission, our central mission, all the time. And we need the curricular support of physical education and health education to do that. And finally, it's been pretty established. You're going to hear a lot more specifics and science about that this afternoon, I think. But healthy kids learn better. So just in general, the healthy kids, active kids, kids who eat breakfast, kids who eat healthy meals, have better grades, have better test scores, have better focus and attention in school, less absence from school, less misbehavior in school, and possibly less anxiety and depression. So why wouldn't schools, with their central mission of learning, want to have all those things and make sure that the kids are as healthy and that their school environment is as healthy as possible while they're at school? And the other thing about schools is that there's fallout to what goes on at home. How many of you have heard from your kids or your grandkids or your nieces and nephews? We learned in school about seatbelts, for example. People that are my age didn't have seatbelts as a regular thing in our childhood. So sometimes we are less attentive to putting on our seatbelt, especially if we're not in the driving seat. But my grandchildren will be right there to say, Oma, put your seatbelt on, if I'm sitting in the third row of the Tahoe. So these messages that we teach them in school and the environment we provide in school is a mechanism for supporting healthy lifestyles in the community overall and educating parents and other adults about maintaining a healthy lifestyle. One of the things that makes schools unique is that we have changed our culture a great deal in the last 100 years, but as you'll see in a moment, schools have not changed so much in the last 100 years. So here's the then and now of, obvious things to, again, we had one car. When I was a child, we had one car. We got a TV while I was growing up, the first one TV. We had one landline phone, which was talk to an operator to get your connection made. We had one worker. Dad worked. Mom stayed at home. We had snail mail, and we went shopping for things in stores. We walked to school, and we walked home for lunch and had lunch at home, and then we walked back again. We played in the neighborhood after school without very much supervision, frankly. And we went to movies only in the theater. Okay, so now you know what it's like now, but it's very different from that. So how about schools? 180 days a year? We still have 180 days a year. 6 or 7 hours per day? We still have 6 or 7 hours a day in most schools of the academic part of the day. There may be extended day and things like that, but the school day is 6 or 7 hours. Summer break in the summer, 60 to 90 days off, all in a row. Self-contained classrooms. We still predominantly have self-contained classrooms. We walked to school. Now we ride or bus to school. We had lunch at home, lunch at school, home after school, extended day programs for many, many kids, or latchkey situations. We had some kind of PE and recess, and maybe we have PE and recess or recess now. So schools are still operating like they did 150 to 100 years ago, but the world is racing on. Schools are also a huge bureaucracy, which makes changing those patterns and so forth very, very difficult. Yet knowledge has expanded. We're still trying to teach everything that's been learned in the last 100 years, in addition to what was learned before that, in the same amount of time. So time, which also becomes money, is a major, major problem for schools. We have 6 hours. What are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to say we roughly spend an hour on math, English, the mess areas I call them, math, English, social studies, and science. So 4 hours are gone. Now we have 2 hours for everything else that everybody expects schools to do. The technology, the media, the band, the art, the music, the physical education, the health education, lunchtime. Now we want some other things. And everybody that wants to do something about children wants schools to do it. So the schools are just feel overwhelmed by all that. And so the challenges that schools face, besides just the obvious cost, resources, curricular development issues, and so on, include the politicizing of education, where there's changes. Every administration that comes through changes what the theme is, the name of the program, and whatever, and we are very focused on high-stakes testing to the point of paranoia by the school board, the school administrators, the school principals. And so everything is focused around how can we get more time to prepare for these standardized tests that are essential, or our school is going to be put out of business or whatever. So these are the things that have challenged schools to take on additional, whether it's about health or anything that it would be about, would be perceived as an overload. We can't do one more thing now. So we need to make this as easy as possible for them, and these initiatives that we're going to talk about in a minute hopefully can help with that. But we need to have those, and we'll come back to what are the characteristics that we need to consider in the programs that we try to bring into schools. The Shape of the Nation is a report that the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance does regularly to survey the policies that states have, and they've been doing it over a period of years, and there has been some improvement. These are infographics that you can't read. I'll put up the list in a second, but schools are thinking about these things, and the advocacy that's been going on in the last 10 years in particular has, since the development of some of the other curricular areas and the advocacy that we have pushed for health education and physical education, have, I think, helped to encourage states at the state government level to put in policies that are more supportive for physical education and physical activity, and health education as well. Health education has always been more complicated because there is the additional concern in some parts of the country about some of the content of health education. Not so much about healthy lifestyles, but the family life education, or whatever the relevant name is, has sometimes made people take a hands-off thing and not deal with health education, but they have, Ohio, for example, is a state that has physical education standards and was slow or may not yet have health education standards. So 74% of states require PE from elementary to high school, but not in every grade and not at the right amounts of physical education and so forth. And then 3 states meet the 150-minute per week national guideline. So that's a good thing, but it's not the same 3 states that are part of the 6 that require PE in every grade, and it's not the same as the ones that have physical activity breaks in the classroom or require recess. So it's spotty all over the country. Some states are focused on let's get recess in place, and other states are working on getting more minutes for actual curricular physical education. So we have spotty and irregular progress across the different states in the country, when really we want all states in all schools and all grades to have, in elementary school, to have 150 minutes a week of curricular physical education, and to have recess, and to have fitness education and assessment in their physical education program, to not allow exemptions from physical education. And those exemptions are not usually because somebody can't do something. They are exemptions because they play sports, or because they take band, or they take a foreign language, or something like that that means they have a conflict. And then certainly we want all states to have physical education in before, after, as well as during school, and we want them to have institute physical activity breaks in classrooms. You know, you all were anxious for a break, and now I'm here standing, keeping, you know, between you and lunch. And so you'll get restless when it gets to be at that, close to that 12 o'clock time. And yet we expect kids to pretty much stay focused for that whole 6 to 7 hour period. I mean, we march them to lunch in a line, and then we march them to get a drink of water when they come back in from recess, if they got recess, and so forth. So they don't get to have breaks where they have discretionary time if they don't have recess. And if they do have recess, it's usually 20 minutes of time where they, you know, can be outside. And many schools have very strict rules about when they can be outside or not. If it isn't the right temperature, if it's too hot or too cold, then they can't be outdoors. And so they have recess inside, which is not usually very active. You know, they're sitting in the cafeteria for their recess time, or they're sitting in their classroom and they may play Simon Says or whatever, which is better than nothing, but it's not really the kind of physical activity that's going to, you know, really give them a break and refresh them to be more focused for the rest of the day. So the CDC also, in much more detail, conducts the School Health Policies and Practices Survey, SHIPS, and that asks about lots and lots of practices in schools at the state, school district, and building level. And they got off schedule here now. I think it was 6 years between the last survey and this one published in 2012, and they only did states and districts. But they are seeing some progress. So again, we do have room for optimism here. And this, you can't read this slide very well, but you can see the trend that more schools in the top line are have physical education required at elementary school. More schools prohibit, and this surprised me at this point because we've been working on this smoking thing for a long time, but more schools prohibit smoking everywhere at school and in all events. And then the greatest improvement was in what's in vending machines. They prohibit unhealthy foods in the vending machines in 48% of the schools they surveyed now. So those are all definitely good things to be happening, and I'll give you the reference for that in a minute. All right, these are just a selected group, and the names of these groups and organizations and stuff are long, hence, you know, Alphabet City here, but I'll try as we go through them to sort them out if you don't recognize them. Some of them I'm sure you recognize anyway. But we have a lot of government initiatives, and some of those are organized at the federal level but are implemented through the states, so they involve both state and federal government, and some of them are one or the other as a resource. And then there's two other things that are categories. And the one is the advocacy and policy things that support the actions that we want to take with different programming. And the other are programming kinds of help that different organizations and agencies and so on are doing. And on the other side, the green side, are non-governmental groups that are very active, and you'll find the same ones repeating, doing things, or involved in things. And they also are, most of those groups are very active in disseminating the national guidelines and policies and advocacy documents and initiatives of the government. So we're going to talk about some of these individually. The Child Nutrition Act reauthorization was in 2010, and then we've had the Child Nutrition Act since 1966, and it gets reauthorized periodically, and each time it's refined, and that's a good thing. And in this, the time before 2010 was when we put in the school wellness policy requirement and the wellness committees. And so in 2010, they strengthened the accountability about that and require some monitoring of what's going on with school wellness policies and the levels of implementation and those sorts of things. It also added $4.5 billion over 10 years to the feeding programs for schools and children. And so that was for all of us that are concerned about healthy eating and physical activity, that was a good action by the Congress, and they don't act very often these days on anything, but certainly not on these things. CDC, which we just had the SHIPS study, which is on the top here, does a lot of things, and many of you probably know about some of those or many of those kinds of things. They have an Office of Physical Activity and Nutrition, and they have the Youth Health Services. And so those areas in particular are doing things all the time to help schools measure and assess the status of the health environment and the health activities in their school, and to have resources to improve whatever they find they are deficient in, and to recognize and acknowledge and celebrate those things that they're doing well. So the next few slides have pictures of the covers of some of these documents. I don't know if any of you have ever used the School Health Index. Anybody? Yeah, the School Health Index is a pretty comprehensive tool to look at all the health practices or health supporting practices in a school, and then develop, it's sort of a needs assessment, so that allows you to develop a plan, an action plan for improving those kinds of things. PCAT and HECAT are curricular analysis tools. So you look at whether your physical education program, in this case, or your health education program is meeting national guidelines for content that students should learn in physical education and health education. Again, you can compare your curricular documents. It gives you a way of analyzing what those documents include. And here's the School Health Index. So these are all free. The tools are free. You can download them from the websites at CDC, along with many other very helpful resources for working with schools. And certainly the reporting of what the status of various school health practices are and the status of kids relative to the major risk factors are reported regularly through CDC. So it's a great resource. The newest guideline relative to physical activity is the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans. And this slide has the page that's about children and youth, which says one chapter for children and youth. But the document is for all Americans. It's about physical activity for adults, seniors, pregnant women, disabled individuals, and children and youth. So there's a lot of information in it about the amounts and kinds of physical activity that each of those groups should get. And so the guidelines that we're using, your 521, your 1 is 60 minutes or more of physical activity per day for kids. And the or more part is important. These are minimums, these amounts. And for kids that are elementary age, they should be active most of the time and quiet a little of the time when they're not sleeping. So the notion of giving activity breaks in school and those kinds of things is really important. And the 60 minutes or the 1 hour is to accumulate. And with kids, as was mentioned, I think, by Sandy in the last talk, they do little bursts of activity, and then they flop down. Like if you have them do a little run, they will run as fast as they possibly can for about 30 seconds, and then they flop down to rest because they don't know about pacing. You know, those of us that are trying to train and we're pacing along, they don't do that. They go zip, flop, zip, flop. And so, but those all are valuable to their accumulation of moderate and vigorous physical activity. And the guidelines indicate that they should be vigorous at least 3 days a week, 3 days of their, not 60 minutes solid of vigorous, but the equivalent of that across the week. And similarly, they should have part of their 60 minutes should be about muscle strengthening and bone strengthening kinds of activities, not just aerobic activities. So those are the basics, main points of the guidelines for children. And they should be, the activities should be varied and enjoyable, and DA is developmentally appropriate for the age of the kids. So that's what we're aiming for. And when we say we want schools to add 60 minutes a day, then that's assuming that we will get more than that because kids will do hopefully something out, you know, than when they're at home or other places. And the IOM published a report in May about physical activity in schools, suggesting that at least half of the 60 minutes should be during the school day, within the, not before and after school, but during the school day. So that's an additional factor to consider. In some schools, you know, if you can get them to add 30 minutes a day of physical activity outside of curricular physical education, that would be a good accomplishment. So the guidelines stimulated the development of the National Physical Activity Plan. And that is now overseen by the National Coalition to Promote Physical Activity, which is, as it says, a coalition group that includes the major organizations involved with physical activity like ACSM, AFERD, Heart Association, NRPA, the recreation people, the Y, and so forth. And they had organized a coordinating committee and developed an implementation plan based on the physical activity guidelines for Americans. And there are 8 sectors. One's business, one's policy, and one's education. And so these are the 5 strategies for education, the education sector, and under those, there is an array of tactics for each one of the strategies. But this mentions early childhood as well. So schools and early childhood daycare programming are referred to in this plan. So the National Coalition for Physical Activity also does a lot of advocacy policy work and in getting action on the Hill for various legislation that does involve physical activity. And right now, one of the big ones that they're working on is physical education as a core subject, and health education as core subjects, which opens up the opportunity for access to some funds and those kinds of things. Not that because states have to require or not require physical education, it doesn't mean that everybody would immediately and automatically have to implement physical education, but it would make that a national goal, which would be a start. Okay, one of the things that's really given a kick forward is Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign. And there's not, they keep this pretty high profile, and all the major organizations are involved in this. All the cabinet level people are involved in the coordination of this. And the Partnership for Prevention, which is the corporate piece of Let's Move, is stepped up with a lot of funding to support various, mostly public relations, advocacy kinds of activities. I think there was an event yesterday or late last week at a school in Washington, D.C., where Michelle Obama and Shaquille O'Neal went over to the school and, made a case for Let's Move active schools. So she's now, in this third year of this program, is really focusing on school things. And so other people are connecting their efforts about schools to the Let's Move active schools version of the whole overall campaign. The Let's Move active schools actual work, which is the case with many of these government initiatives, is being done by the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, which is a group organized by the Clinton Foundation and the Heart Association and funded by Robert Wood Johnson to provide resources and technical assistance to schools in their Healthy Schools program. And now they're also working on this program, as is AFERD, is the other lead organization. The President's Council for Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition got a name change a couple years ago to add nutrition to it, so that was a good thing. And we have finally are consolidating all the fitness assessment information, which had evolved into being 2 or 3 different programs that were really all the same. And so now they've brought that all together. It has assessment, it has education and professional development, and it has recognition, just like the President's Challenge has had historically. But now it'll be a criterion-referenced assessment, and it will have systematic professional development for teachers, both physical education teachers, pre-service and in-service, and other teachers who might be involved with fitness in schools. Even the NFL, and again, I think the Michelle Obama Let's Move thing was partly responsible for their involvement in this program, but it's been well received by schools. It is a 6-step implementation process so that schools can follow these steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So join the league, which is sign up and get involved in the web-based resources. They have sites for kids, sites for supporters, and sites for educators. And they have a playbook that they have just redone. And so schools can engage in challenges that are very attractive to kids. And they give prizes and so on, including football tickets and visits from NFL players, if you're close enough to the main markets where the NFL teams are, to come to have football players come to their school and talk about healthy lifestyles and so forth. So that's been a well-received program and well-funded by the NFL. Action for Healthy Kids, Reggie mentioned that in the beginning. Reggie is now the chair of the board of directors for Action for Healthy Kids, and they were initiated by the Dairy Council and Dr. Satcher, David Satcher, when right after, I guess, he was Surgeon General, and has teams in each state, which allows them to grant out from money that we raise to state initiatives or local initiatives, get grant money to implement programs in schools in their local area. This Game On, the Ultimate Wellness Challenge, is one of their programs which involves encouraging eating better and moving more in school. And it has a needs assessment, so a champion can assess, get a committee together, assess how the school might increase the activity and healthy eating in their school, add a salad bar, have a classroom break program, and all the resources in it provides the resources or lists of resources so that they can implement those kinds of programs. So that's just an example of one of the programmatic things that they do. But basically, they are trying to work with state teams to do the work on the ground in their state in the context of what the state requirements are there and the local school requirements and current practices are. Let's Go 5210 Goes to School is what you're going to hear more about this, I think, this afternoon also. And you heard a little bit about this morning, but most and many of these programs begin as small local efforts. This one was in Portland, here in Maine, and then they grow as people find out about them and as they have successes and so forth. So the fact that you have a successful initiative going on here in Maine, we had there's an initiative at Tufts that has identified innovations in local areas, and they're trying to move those programs that they identified as innovative and successful in increasing school health and healthy lifestyles to scale. So they're giving small grants, Child Obesity 180, Active Schools Acceleration Project is giving small grants to schools who apply and say that they will try to implement some of these, one-off programs in their school. Okay, what of all of this, does all of this suggest for maximizing the impact that we have in schools? People make a difference, as you all know, and so finding a champion or 2 or 3 champions is a key strategy. Who is going to be the point person when you decide to go into a school? So knowing something about the school, who's on first and so forth, what is the attitude of the principal? This might be, some people think the obvious thing is, the PE teacher should run the activity program and, the school nurse should do whatever because they're about health. But that might not be the person who's going to have the most impact in a particular school. It might be a classroom teacher. It might be a parent. It might be a couple of people who are willing to work together, but nobody is willing to just be the Lone Ranger about it. And if you can't sell the principal on a whole school approach, then you need to get that done first. So the advocacy with the administration of the school is going to be key, and that's how new programs start out in a place where the administration is willing to be a pilot project or a test case or whatever, and then you can grow the programs from there. Using the existing infrastructure has to do with the school wellness committee or whatever other PTA group might have a health committee or those kinds of things, and add a collaboration with a community group that maybe does something in the school, those kinds of things. The school wellness policy is a requirement now, so you can use the leverage of that and build on whatever the school wellness policy says, your activities and initiatives into achieving the goals of the school wellness policy. And we talked earlier about the primary mission of schools. Connect health to all school improvement planning and policy decisions and to the primary mission of schools every time you speak to somebody at a school about healthy lifestyles. Whoops, I did it. What did you ever say? Yeah. Start small and build, and start with low time, low money demands and costs. And there are lots of things that you can do that don't require a lot of money or a lot of time. And as I said, time is much more critical issue to most schools than money directly. I mean, they know they don't have money, but they really don't have time. And time is the one thing that's equal for all of us, right? There's only so many hours in the day. So, and then facilitate, if possible, integration of health into other content. So we're not adding a new thing. You can read books and find books, do a project in the media center about materials that have good health content in them that students can read as their classroom reading or their outside reading, those kinds of things. Graphing can be done with physical activity, calorie counting, all kinds of things can connect to the rest of the curriculum, and helping teachers to have resources to do that can make things work. Make it easy to be healthy. Okay, our children are our greatest resource, and they must be healthy to meet the challenges they're going to have in their lives, some of which we don't even know about yet, but we know it's going to be challenging probably. Schools have a great opportunity, but clearly they have many challenges in trying to do their work, their primary mission, and all the other things people want them to do. Some schools have made great progress and provide models and encouragement to others that it is, in fact, possible to have a healthy school, have good academics, and still and not be, closed down because of your test scores. The collaboration of all the people involved in the school community is critical. There are resources to help these and many others, and you'll start finding them as you look at these, because they have some of them gather other resources for people. And then I know that all of you are the tools that are making a difference now, and that's a positive and an optimistic feeling that I have seen this progress over my career, which, as you can see, has been quite a long one. So thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.